No one noticed him at first. The man was lying on the ground, barely moving, his breathing uneven, almost fading into silence. People passed by, some slowed down for a second, others just glanced and kept walking. A few even pulled out their phones, but not to help. Just to record. It looked like one of those moments where everyone assumes someone else will step in. But no one did. Seconds felt longer. The man tried to move his hand, but it dropped back to the pavement. His eyes were open, but there was something empty in them, like he was already giving up. And then, something strange happened. From across the street, one person stopped. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just paused. Like he had been watching this entire time. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. While everyone else seemed frozen in confusion, this man looked completely calm. Almost like he already understood what was happening. But here's the part no one realized in that moment. This wasn't just a random situation. And that man standing there, he wasn't there by accident. As the crowd continued to hesitate, the tension grew heavier. You could almost feel it, like something bad was about to happen if no one acted fast. The man on the ground let out a weak breath. Maybe his last. And still, no one moved. Except one person. The same man who had been standing quietly, observing, waiting. He finally took a step forward. Slow. Controlled. Intentional. And in that exact moment, something shifted. Because what he was about to do next, no one saw coming. Just a few minutes earlier, everything looked completely normal. The street was busy, but not chaotic. People were walking at their usual pace, some heading to work, others lost in their own thoughts. Cars moved steadily, and the noise of the city blended into a familiar background hum. Nothing about that moment hinted that something serious was about to happen. The man, who now lay helpless on the ground, was just another face in the crowd back then. He wasn't asking for attention. He wasn't causing trouble. In fact, if you had seen him a few minutes earlier, you probably wouldn't have remembered him at all. He walked slowly, almost carefully, like someone carrying more weight than just what was visible. His clothes were simple, slightly worn out, but clean. His eyes moved around, not nervously, but thoughtfully, like he was searching for something, or maybe trying to avoid it. At one point, he stopped near the edge of the sidewalk. He placed his hand against a nearby wall, as if steadying himself. For a brief second, it looked like he might sit down. But he didn't. Instead, he took a deep breath and kept walking. That was the first sign. Not obvious. Not dramatic. But something wasn't right. A couple of people noticed him slow down. One person even turned their head slightly, as if debating whether to check on him, but then quickly looked away and continued walking. Because in a busy place, hesitation is easy. You think, maybe he's fine. You assume, someone else will help if it's serious. And just like that, responsibility disappears. The man took a few more steps. Then suddenly, his balance shifted. It wasn't a loud fall. It wasn't even fast. He just collapsed. At first, no one reacted. For a moment, it almost looked like he had simply sat down too quickly. But then his body didn't move. His hand twitched once, then went still. Now people started noticing. A small circle of attention began to form, but not action. Just attention. Someone whispered, "What happened?" Another person said, "Is he okay?" But no one stepped forward. A man in the crowd pulled out his phone, not to call for help, but to record. Another person shook their head and walked away. The seconds kept passing. And with each second, the situation became more serious. The man's breathing grew weaker. His chest barely moved. His face had lost color. This wasn't just a random fall anymore. This was urgent. And yet, the crowd remained stuck in that strange space between concern and action. Collision. Now think about this for a second. Backhand index pointing right. If you were standing there, would you step in immediately, or wait, just like everyone else? Because that's exactly what was happening here. Everyone saw the problem. But no one wanted to be the first to act. And sometimes, that delay is all it takes for things to get worse. What no one realized at that moment was that someone else in that same crowd had already made a decision. A decision that would change everything. The seconds turned into minutes, but it felt like hours. The man on the ground struggled to breathe. His chest rose slowly, almost imperceptibly, and then sank back again. Each shallow gasp echoed the urgency of the situation, but strangely, the world around him seemed to move in slow motion. People passed by, glancing, whispering, pointing, but no one stepped in. A woman in the crowd gasped audibly and covered her mouth, as if fearing to touch him. A man with a backpack muttered something under his breath and looked around, clearly trying to see if someone else would act first. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was frozen by indecision. The stranger's eyes searched desperately for help. His hands twitched weakly, reaching out for anyone who could save him. But still, hesitation gripped the crowd. No one moved closer. It was as if an invisible force had rooted everyone to the spot, paralyzed by fear, uncertainty, or the assumption that someone else would take responsibility. Then, something shifted. A few onlookers started murmuring amongst themselves, debating what should be done. "Call an ambulance," one whispered. "Maybe he's faking it," said another. "Don't touch him, what if he's dangerous?" someone else added. And in that debate, precious time slipped away. The man's condition was worsening rapidly. His breathing became more erratic, shallow gasps that hinted at the fragility of his situation. His face, pale moments ago, now had a slightly bluish tint. It was clear, if no one acted soon, the outcome could be fatal. From a distance, someone finally shouted, "Is anyone going to help him?" But even that didn't inspire immediate action. The group exchanged nervous glances. Fear, uncertainty, and social hesitation kept them trapped in place. Amid this chaos, one individual, standing a few steps back, watched everything unfold in silence. Unlike the rest of the crowd, he did not hesitate. His body remained calm, controlled, and unshakable. Every subtle movement, every glance he cast seemed deliberate, calculated, and composed. People around him barely noticed him yet, but there was something different about the way he observed the scene. Unlike everyone else, he didn't look worried. He didn't frown. He didn't whisper or glance nervously. He simply assessed, taking in every detail, the position of the man on the ground, the reactions of the bystanders, the surrounding environment, and even the slight changes in the stranger's breathing. As the tension escalated, the crowd grew more restless. Some stepped closer, only to retreat immediately after seeing the man's pale face. Others held their phones ready to call for help, yet delayed dialing. Every hesitation magnified the gravity of the situation. The stranger, sensing his own weakening, attempted to lift his hand. His eyes, filled with fear and desperation, searched for anyone willing to intervene. The seconds ticked by, stretching longer and longer. And then, a small commotion rippled through the crowd. Someone's shoe scraped against the pavement. A mother whispered to her child to step back. A man muttered under his breath, clearly conflicted about what to do. But in all of these micro-movements, no one made a definitive choice. It was clear, the man's life hung in a delicate balance, and any further delay could make the difference between life and death. Collision, here's a question for you, the viewer. Backhand index pointing right. If you were standing there, watching this unfold, would you take the first step to help, or would you freeze like everyone else? Because that question wasn't hypothetical for the crowd present. They were living it in real time. Every hesitation compounded the tension. Meanwhile, the man in the distance who had been observing silently finally shifted slightly, taking a step forward, but carefully, deliberately, without drawing attention to himself. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the growing panic and indecision of the crowd. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to create a ripple of tension. The stranger on the ground let out a faint groan, weak and strained. It was a signal that time was running out. The crowd's indecision reached a breaking point. Some whispered urgent instructions, others simply stood frozen. Then, the observer's eyes locked onto the man on the ground. He started moving with purpose, his steps measured, each movement deliberate. There was an intensity in his focus that no one else possessed. As he drew closer, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Every bystander's gaze followed him, wondering, fearing, and anticipating what was about to happen next. The stage was set. The moment was thick with suspense. And just as it seemed that time might run out, the observer prepared to take action that would change everything. The air felt heavier now. Every second seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing louder than before. The stranger on the ground struggled to lift his head, his eyes searching desperately for someone, anyone, who might step in. But still, the crowd remained frozen, a mix of fear, hesitation, and disbelief locking them in place. And then, from the distance, a figure appeared. Not running, not shouting. Just walking calmly, deliberately, with a rhythm that immediately set him apart from everyone else around. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. But there was a presence about him, a subtle authority that seemed to command the scene without a single word. People instinctively parted slightly as he drew closer, their whispers dying down. Something about the way he moved made it impossible not to notice him. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was controlled, precise, confident. The stranger on the ground lifted a trembling hand, weakly, as if sensing hope. But the bystanders, still unsure, still hesitant, held their positions, unsure whether to act. The observer's eyes scanned the scene carefully. Every detail, the positioning of the man on the ground, the hesitant bystanders, the potential obstacles in the immediate surroundings. Every movement was calculated, deliberate, and purposeful. He stopped a few feet away, and for a moment, it seemed as if he was merely studying the situation, analyzing, assessing, weighing every possibility. His face was calm, unreadable. There was no panic, no urgency, just focus. It was then that the crowd began to notice the subtle differences in his demeanor. People started whispering among themselves. "Who is that guy? Why is he just standing there? Something about him. He's different from the rest of us." The stranger on the ground let out another shallow breath, struggling to stay conscious. It was clear that time was slipping away. And yet, the man remained calm. Not a twitch, not a sudden movement, just unwavering focus. He crouched slightly to observe the stranger more closely. Every muscle in his body was ready, alert, prepared to act, but he still didn't rush. His presence alone was enough to draw attention, to command focus. People around him began shifting nervously. A few stepped back instinctively, giving him space, though no one understood why. Something about the way he held himself radiated authority and control. As he took another step forward, the atmosphere changed. The tension in the air became almost tangible. The faint hum of the city seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of shallow breaths, distant footsteps, and the stranger's weak gasps. The observer's gaze never left the man on the ground. Every movement, every subtle change in his breathing was noted. And then, without warning, he adjusted his stance, still calm, still deliberate, but with a subtle shift that hinted he was ready to intervene at any moment. The bystanders watched, transfixed. Some exchanged anxious glances. Some whispered urgently to each other. But no one dared move closer. And in that moment, a silent understanding began to spread through the crowd. Something was about to happen. Not chaotic, not violent, but decisive. The man on the ground let out a faint groan, as if aware that help was finally approaching. His eyes flickered toward the observer, hope shimmering briefly despite his weakness. It was a slow approach, methodical, almost cinematic in its precision. Every step calculated. Every movement intentional. The observer's body language alone conveyed confidence and control far beyond the panicked crowd surrounding him. And then, finally, the first glimmer of realization struck some of the onlookers. This wasn't just an ordinary person stepping in. There was something different, almost legendary, about the way he moved. The air hung with suspense. Hearts pounded. Eyes widened. Even those who had initially doubted whether anyone would act now felt the weight of what was about to unfold. And just as the moment reached its peak, the man's face, partially shadowed but unmistakable in its intensity, came into full view. Calm, focused, commanding, ready to act. It was clear to everyone watching, this was no ordinary hero. The stage was set. The tension unbearable. And just as the stranger on the ground teetered between unconsciousness and survival, the observer prepared to make his move, a move that would change everything. The moment of suspense was absolute. Every breath, every heartbeat, every second held the crowd, And now, the audience, in rapt anticipation. No one knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain: when he acted, it would be decisive, controlled, and unforgettable. The tension was unbearable. Every second stretched longer than the last, as if time itself had slowed. The stranger on the ground barely moved, his chest rising and falling in shallow, weak breaths. The crowd held its collective breath, frozen between fear and uncertainty, unsure of what was about to happen. And then, it happened. The observer finally stepped forward decisively. Not hastily, not violently, but with a calm confidence that cut through the panic like a knife. Every movement was deliberate, every step purposeful. He approached the man on the ground with the precision of someone who had done this before, not once, but countless times. Then the crowd gasped. It was not just anyone who had chosen to act. The man's face was unmistakable. Calm, focused, and commanding, Steven Seagal. For a moment, silence fell over the street. People's mouths opened in disbelief. Phones were raised, not to capture a hero in the act, but to confirm what their eyes couldn't believe. It was him. Steven Seagal, the legend, the calm presence amidst chaos, was here. And he was moving to help. He knelt beside the stranger on the ground, assessing the situation with the same controlled precision that had defined his entire presence. There was no panic, no rush. Just clarity. Just confidence. Every action calculated, every gesture intentional. The stranger's eyes widened, a mixture of relief and disbelief flickering across his pale face. He reached weakly toward Steven, as if instinctively knowing that help had arrived. And then, just before intervening fully, Steven paused, looking up at the crowd. His gaze was steady, almost challenging, as if silently asking. Collision engagement question. Backhand index pointing right. If you were watching this unfold, would you feel inspired to act yourself, or would you freeze like everyone else did? The question hung in the air, unspoken yet deeply felt by everyone present. Then, with a deliberate motion, Steven acted. He moved the stranger into a safer position, checking his breathing, ensuring that every movement minimized further harm. The action was smooth, almost effortless, yet undeniably powerful. There was no dramatization, no unnecessary flair, just precise, effective action. The crowd began to murmur, their earlier hesitation replaced by awe. Some whispered, "It's him, it's really him." Others nodded, realizing the gravity of the moment and the rare skill of the man now intervening. Even those who had initially doubted or hesitated found themselves captivated. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. Fear and uncertainty gave way to admiration and respect. As Steven assessed the situation, he didn't just address the immediate danger. His presence alone seemed to calm the chaos around him. Bystanders unconsciously gave him space, creating a protective perimeter without being told. His authority was absolute, silent, and undeniable. Then came the turning point. With a precise movement, he stabilized the stranger enough to prevent a complete collapse. The stranger's shallow gasps steadied slightly, and color began returning faintly to his face. The threat of imminent danger diminished, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. People around them began to exhale, slowly letting go of the tension that had gripped them for minutes. Yet even in relief, the awe remained. They had witnessed something extraordinary, not just an act of heroism, but a display of calm, decisive mastery that few could imagine possessing. And through it all, Steven remained focused, methodical, and in control. He didn't speak much, yet every movement communicated competence, reassurance, and authority. The stranger on the ground, now slightly more stable, whispered a faint, "Thank you." His voice trembled, but it carried genuine gratitude. Steven nodded, offering a reassuring presence rather than dramatic gestures. The crowd had learned something in those few intense moments. Sometimes heroes don't announce themselves with noise or spectacle. Sometimes heroes arrive quietly, assess the danger, and act with precision and calm. And at that moment, it was clear to everyone. This was not just a chance encounter. Steven Seagal had arrived with intent, and the results were undeniable. The tension that had gripped the street finally began to shift, but the story was far from over. Steven Seagal had stabilized the man, but the atmosphere remained charged. The crowd was still holding its collective breath, their fascination mingled with lingering fear. Everyone had witnessed something extraordinary, but no one knew the full story yet. The stranger on the ground, though slightly steadier, still struggled to sit up. His movements were weak, uncertain, but now bolstered by the calm presence of Stephen beside him. Every adjustment Seagal made was precise, careful positioning of the man's arms, checking for any injuries, ensuring that he wouldn't fall or twist unnaturally. Every action communicated one thing: competence, control, and safety. And then, something unexpected happened. From the crowd, a figure emerged, a bystander who had initially hesitated to act. Perhaps inspired, perhaps moved by the sheer presence of Steven Seagal, the person cautiously stepped forward. But before they could intervene, Seagal gave a subtle gesture, a nod, almost imperceptible, indicating that help was welcome but needed to be coordinated. This small interaction carried weight. The crowd's tension eased slightly. People realized that heroism didn't always mean jumping in blindly. It could mean assessing, then acting with precision. Stephen's presence had subtly transformed the onlookers from passive witnesses into participants, without saying a word. Then the twist revealed itself. As Seagal helped the man, a passerby whispered to someone else in awe. "Did you see him stop that thief earlier? The one who tried to mug that old woman?" Suddenly, the realization hit everyone. The calm, controlled figure who had just saved the stranger was not only heroic but had been silently intervening in other acts of danger around the city. This wasn't a coincidence. Steven Seagal was here for a reason. His actions were intentional and consistent. He didn't just react to one incident. He had eyes and awareness that anticipated danger before it struck. The crowd, now fully attentive, could feel the layers of the story unfolding. They had thought this was a random act of heroism. But in reality, it was part of a pattern, a deliberate, vigilant effort to protect others without fanfare or dramatics. Meanwhile, the stranger slowly sat up, supported by Seagal. His voice was faint but filled with gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you." Stephen nodded calmly, acknowledging the words, but without overreacting. His focus remained on ensuring the man was safe, demonstrating the kind of controlled decisiveness that set him apart. And then, the final emotional payoff, the crowd's reaction. The bystanders, who had hesitated, murmured among themselves, some whispering apologies for their inaction, others simply in awe. A few stepped closer to offer assistance, encouraged by the example Seagal had silently set. In that moment, everyone watching understood the larger lesson. Heroism isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes, it's measured, deliberate, and quiet, but no less powerful. A single individual, fully aware and willing to act, can transform a dire situation into safety and hope. The stranger, now steady, looked up at Stephen with tears in his eyes. "You didn't just save me. You reminded everyone here what it means to act when it matters most." That statement hung in the air, resonating not just with the crowd on the street, but with anyone who would later hear the story. It was a profound reminder. Courage, precision, and calm determination could inspire others, even in the face of fear. As the immediate danger faded, Stephen stepped back slightly, allowing the crowd to engage with the man he had saved. Yet even in that distance, his presence remained commanding, reassuring, and unforgettable. Every movement, every glance had left an indelible mark on those who witnessed it. The city street returned to its usual rhythm, but the impression of the moment lingered. People had witnessed a story of heroism unlike any other, one defined not by spectacle, but by action, foresight, and deliberate courage. The man, finally able to stand with assistance, glanced back once more at Steven Seagal. Gratitude, respect, and awe mingled in his eyes. The lesson was clear. Sometimes, the most powerful heroism is the quietest, and sometimes, witnessing it is enough to inspire an entire crowd to rethink what they believe about courage, responsibility, and action. Even as the immediate danger faded, the atmosphere on the street remained electric. People were still murmuring, still absorbing what had just occurred. The stranger who had nearly collapsed now stood, slightly unsteady but alive, supported by both bystanders and Steven Seagal's calm guidance. Yet the story wasn't over. Far from it. The crowd's focus shifted, not to the stranger, but to the man who had saved him. Steven Seagal stood slightly apart, observing quietly. His eyes scanned the street and the people around him, as if making sure everything was truly safe. There was no sense of ego, no flourish of recognition, only watchfulness and control. Whispers spread among the bystanders. Did you notice how calm he was the entire time? Do you think he's done this before? Why was he even here at all? And that's when the lingering curiosity hit everyone, the kind that refuses to leave your mind even after the scene ends. Yes, the immediate danger had passed. But questions remained. Why was Steven Seagal there? How did he anticipate the unfolding danger? Had he arrived purely by chance, or was there something more behind his presence? Even the man who had been saved glanced at him, puzzled yet grateful. "How did you know?" he asked softly. His voice carried the weight of disbelief and awe. Steven only nodded slightly, his expression unreadable, almost enigmatic. There was no explanation, no backstory revealed. Just action, presence, and the silent command of respect. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but their attention remained divided. Many cast glances over their shoulders, drawn back by the lingering sense that this encounter was extraordinary. It was as if they had glimpsed a rare phenomenon, calm mastery meeting raw human need. Meanwhile, some of the bystanders, those inspired by what they had seen, began helping the stranger more actively, assisting him to a nearby bench, offering water, or making sure he was truly okay. A ripple effect of courage had begun, initiated by a single deliberate act of heroism. And yet, as the streets slowly returned to normal, the mind can't help but wonder. This wasn't an ordinary day. And this wasn't an ordinary man. There was a deeper story waiting, one that the crowd hadn't fully grasped. Stories of similar interventions, of moments where someone had quietly but decisively changed the course of events around him. This was a pattern, not a coincidence. Collision retention hook, trap ending. Backhand index pointing right. What happened after this moment shocked everyone even more. The man who was saved wasn't just a random stranger. And Steven Seagal's presence wasn't purely coincidental. There was a story behind this encounter, one that would reveal more danger, more courage, and more unexpected twists than anyone could have imagined. The crowd dispersed, but the tension, the curiosity, the awe, they all lingered. The questions remained unanswered, hanging in the air. Who else had Steven Seagal helped before this moment? How had he anticipated the danger so precisely? And what would happen the next time someone needed urgent help in his presence? Even those who walked away could not stop thinking about it. Their minds replayed the slow, deliberate movements, the calm authority, the calculated interventions. They were witnesses to something rare, something beyond ordinary heroism. The stranger, now seated and finally safe, glanced again at Seagal. Gratitude lingered in his eyes, but so did curiosity. And that was the point, because the story wasn't finished. Steven Seagal turned to leave, his figure gradually disappearing into the crowd, leaving behind questions as profound as the action itself. Every step, every motion, every glance had left an imprint, not just on the people present, but on the memory of the day itself. And as he walked away, one thing became clear: heroism isn't always loud. It doesn't always demand recognition. But it leaves questions, inspiration, and stories that demand to be retold, stories that linger far longer than the moment itself. The final thought remained, echoing in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. This was only one incident. The full story, the full truth of his presence, is still out there. And the next time someone is in danger, who knows what might happen?